Ubisoft announced the Black Flag remake and they didn't call me for help. So I made my own remake. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an 18th century ship from Assassin's Creed Black Flag with characters, sails, and cannons, all to be featured within one epic cinematic that I created by myself without using AI, using these 5 tools standing right behind me. So, who is gonna win? A Ubisoft production or us? Let's map out the characters. So we've got Edward Kenway, Adewale, this Spanish officer, a Spanish captain, and these 2 pirates. Let's start with Edward. So I started with a base mesh, then I hopped on ZBrush and made sure to sculpt some form on him in order to give him some more identity. Then I made my way up to subdivision levels and made sure to give him some finer details like pores, pimples, and whatnot. I was aiming for a more rugged look for Edward with this sculpt, so I also added this scar on his right cheek, just the same way he's scarred in the game. After I was satisfied with the sculpts, I imported them into Substance Painter for some texturing. Here I just matched the rugged look I was aiming for, and after putting eyes, hair, and his cool beard on him, he's done. Almost. He just needs clothes. And in case you haven't realized yet, the original Edward Kenway has multiple layers of clothing, and so this was going to be very hard to create. So I hopped back onto the ZBrush and I started creating the clothes. I started with the inner coat, then the extensions on the coat, then the trousers, and kept adding clothes until I was happy with the result. All we need to do now is to make him move, because he's shaped like a cross right now. And the way we do this in 3D is by creating something called a rig, which is sort of like a connected bone system which allows movements of specific joints, be it the fingers, hands, or the feet. If we give this rig an animation by using keyframes, we can get him to do this. Anyways, after all the work, Edward is finally done. Edward, spin the wheel. Wait, why are you punching it? Stop punching. What? You smashed it. Get it? Just like you're gonna smash the yeah.
Subscribe.
And that brings us to our next character, Adewale. So to make Adewale was more like the same procedure with Edward. I just started with a base mesh, then I sculpted some details on the base mesh, like this G on his chest, which was a branding mark. Then I gave him this cool texture in Substance Painter, then I added some clothes and simulations to him, then I rigged him, and after all that work, Adewale was ready. Now the character is finally ready. It was time I actually started to make the film. But before I could even start animating a single frame, I still had to make the storyboard. There were going to be 5 scenes in total. For the storyboard, I took inspiration from the opening of Assassin's Creed Black Flag, where Edward and Adewale first meet. It begins with a Spanish fleet carrying prisoners. Edward and Adewale escape, fight their way onto a brig, and Edward takes the wheel. From there, the chase begins, and well, you'll see the rest as we build each scene. Now, for the first shot, I had to make Adewale take down a Spanish guard below the deck of a man-of-war ship. But wait, I have to make the guard first. Now I have to make the environment. So I hopped back to the game, played a little bit, took a screenshot image as reference, then I started making it. A lot of extruding and insetting here and there. I also added some sugar crates to be historically accurate to what the ship actually had. This table and the paper, bombs scattered on floors, and I think this turned out pretty well. Now for the animation, I just animated Adewale to take cover, then he assassinates the Spanish guard by strangling him. By the way, this shot is literally just a box in a void. It wasn't an actual ship. But we're gonna be making ships later in the video, so stick around. I rendered and composited the shot inside of After Effects, then I color graded inside of DaVinci to give the environment a mood. I wanted it to feel damp and stinky because that's how prisoner ships were back then, and the first shot is actually done. This video was sponsored by Puffyworks. Puffyworks has a Patreon where he sells all the models he made during this remake. Puffyworks is also bankrupt. Please support Puffyworks so he can make more videos. Back to the video. Now it's time for the next shot, the boarding shot. This is where Edward and Ade jump out of the man-of-war ship onto the Jackdaw. But first, let me give you guys a bit of an overview of the Jackdaw. The Jackdaw is an amazing ship of its time as a brig or sloop. It has about 44 guns, 22 on each side when you max it out in the game. To put that into contrast, most brigs at the time had only about 18 guns with 9 guns on each side. So it had a mainmast, a mizzenmast, and a raised upper deck where the captain and the quartermaster would stand to command the rest of the crew. But enough of the nerd stats, let's start making it. So it all started with a plane. Then I extruded the plane until we got this. Then I made some holes for the cannons. Then I made some staircases and some railings. Then I made some vents here and there. Then I added some armor to protect it from the enemies that are coming for it with cannons and stuff. Then we had to make the mast, in which this is harder to create than it looks. Then I gave the ship some textures. I added this wheel for the captain. I made this bowsprit as well, some ropes all over the place. Then I made these rigging lines the sailors climb. Then I made the cannon and the wheel. Then I added the ship's name at the end. Now I know you're wondering why I called it Corredor instead of the Jackdaw, but we'll get onto that later into the video. Well, how do we make the sail animation look like the one from the game? While playing, I kind of noticed that the sails animation didn't quite look like a class simulation. Instead, it looked like a looped animation which was playing over and over again. And that gave me an idea. Instead of running a full class simulation, I could simulate only 100 frames, then I could bake that 100 frames and export it using the mesh cache modifier. And then after re-importing it using the mesh cache modifier, I could apply that modifier onto the sails. But to get it to loop, I could just add the cycles modifier in the graph tab so that it can loop endlessly until we get something that looks like this. And after another 3 grueling weeks of editing, the ship was ready to sail. Now I have to make the man of war itself. It can't be that hard, right? Guys, I spent the past 2 weeks making the man of war ship, and it's just kidding, I didn't actually make it. I found this model of the HMS Victory online and it looks good enough, right? No, it does not. Okay, fine then, let's fix the textures, the sails, the rigging, the color of the ship until we have the perfect final man of war. For the animation, I had to make Adewale swing like this and unsheath his machete to cut down an enemy. And you can't just make a character pick something up in 3D, it doesn't work like that. Instead, we have to play a game of digital sleight of hand. I parented a hidden machete to his hand, kept a separate one on the ground, and at the exact frame of impact, boom! Hide the ground one, unhide the hand one, and congrats! We've just scanned the audience into thinking he picked it up, and this looks perfect. Huge credit to Aldi Filmworks for showing this technique. I did the same illusion for Edward shooting, and then I had to make him remove his hoodie. This I did with shape keys, which was a little problematic to say the least. And finally, with some compositing and some color grading, the second scene is done. Now it's time for the third shot, the escape. Once Edward and Ade took control of the ship, they sailed hundreds of miles away. Because these guys were too slow to keep up, they celebrated, but not for long. Shortly after, they were spotted by a Spanish Navy frigate, which immediately set up an ambush. Okay, now let's animate the ship. I used Blender's noise modifier to make it randomly sway, then moved it using keyframes. But get this, here's the cool part. The reason I called it El Gran Corredor, which is Spanish for the Great Runner, instead of the Jackdaw, is because it was literally running away from the Spanish Navy. Pretty cool, right? For the celebration, I needed a pirate crew. I didn't sculpt every single pirate from scratch because most of them would have been barely visible on camera. Instead, I sculpted one pirate, duplicated him several times, then changed the proportions, making some taller, some shorter, or heavier to create variation. After that, I gave them different animation and placed them behind Edward as he spun the wheel. Then comes the Spanish Navy. I realized they needed an entirely new ship, so I found this Russian frigate on Sketchfab and modified it into a Spanish frigate. I also replaced its sails with my own Jackdaw sails to better match the style, and of course it needed a crew as well. I reused the Spanish guard we made from earlier and created several variations of him. As for the captain, I gave him completely different clothing so he'd stand out from the rest of the crew. Finally, I textured everyone in Substance Painter before animating the captain to emerge from the shadows and stare out toward the horizon where he sees his enemies. And then I composited the shots, then color graded them, and the scene is finally done. Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the shot I've been waiting for this entire video. The naval battle scene. As the title suggests, 2 ships finally clash with the cannons and everything that comes with it. So, to kick things off, the captain gives an order like this. Then I animated the cannons popping out of the Spanish frigate before it ambushes our ship. It comes out from a blind spot and immediately opens fire on the Jackdaw. To create the cannon blast, I made 2 separate smoke simulations using particle systems for reference. One simulation was for the cannon projectile, which looks like this. The other was for the blast itself, creating more of a shockwave effect. Since multiple cannons were firing, I also made each muzzle flash glow for just 2 frames and offset their timing randomly. Cannons rarely fired in perfect sync, otherwise the recoil would actually make the ship unstable. Once the cannonball hit, I created this explosion using soul fracture. Parts of the Jackdaw splinter off as it takes the impact. The Jackdaw then turns to port and returns fire. This time, both ships are exposing their broadsides to each other, meaning the damage would have been far more devastating. To sell that impact, I cut away a section of the enemy ship, fractured it into smaller pieces using the cell fracture add-on, and simulated the debris using rigid body physics. After that, I baked another smoke simulation to help blend everything together and make the destruction feel more believable. And with that, we're finally done with the last scene. But before you see the final result, let's quickly make the intro. For the intro, I had the camera fly high above the ocean toward the Spanish fleet. I also added these birds, duplicated them, and made them follow a curve so that they dramatically passed the camera. To sell this speed, I added a subtle camera shake as they flew by. Finally, I arranged the fleet so that the man-of-war was right in the center, then had the camera fly through the ship, bringing us seamlessly into the very first shot we made for this video. Hands on heart, I never really thought this project would have been possible, especially considering the amount of times my laptops crashed, and because it was so repetitive, I was burning out a lot as well. But after 4 months of work, I would finally like to present to you guys the final result.
Battle pass. I just shit out my ass. Booted up my PC. Cause I need to get that